So, to start off, this all happened many years ago, but I made some comments on my main account and someone said they wanted to hear more of the story. My mill was not as bad as some of yours, but she still was something special. Many moons ago, I met what I thought would end up being my lifelong partner. We dated for a while before he popped the question, and even though it had only been 6 months, everything felt right, and I went ahead with accepting his proposal. Now, at this point, I'd never met his mother, and it was mainly due to distance. I met my then husband while we were both finishing college, some 7 hours from his hometown, so while we'd spoken briefly on the phone, I hadn't met his mom in person. She seemed nice enough though, always had good things to say, although years later looking back, I realized it was always generic. Like you could almost read the same nice things she said on Hallmark greeting cards. She overall seemed happy that he was happy though, so I always ignored any weirdness while we were dating. After we graduated, we moved together to a large city about an hour from where his parents lived. I started working immediately as a courier, which I enjoyed as I never wanted to be stuck in an office, and it let me get used to the city layout in the first weeks we lived there. I would be sent out to take documents between legal offices, medical offices, wherever it was necessary, and one day one of the deliveries took me into an upscale neighborhood to deliver a packet of paperwork to a lawyer. The delivery was uneventful, but leaving the neighborhood I seen a for sale sign, and I remember it all so clearly because that was the day I found my dream home. Something to know, and part of the reason I created a throwaway account, is that I was orphaned as an infant and left with an extremely large inheritance. My parents, while only in their mid-20s when they had me, had the forethought to set things up in case anything happened to them, and they died when I was only a few years old. They'd inherited a lot of money when their parents died before I was born, and had an extremely successful business before a car crash took them both. To put it simply, I wouldn't have to work a day in my life if I didn't want to. My college was paid for, I had not a single dollar of debt, and enough to live on was given to me every month by an auto deposit, but at the time most of my funds were locked up in trusts until I turned 30, at which point I would receive everything. My at the time fiancé, while aware I had money from my deceased parents, had no idea the amount, and I had a long talk with him that same day as I sought to pull some of my trust early to buy the house. He was surprised, not upset, but not expecting it when I showed him the proof. It took a while to get the paperwork done and everything sorted with the lawyer, but I secured the money from my trusts and bought the house after 2 months of us living together. Then his mother declared that she wanted to visit. She hadn't seen her baby boy in almost a year, and she wanted to see what kind of life he was leading. We agreed to take care of driving and picking her up to go to dinner in our city. His mom, while pleasant and soft-spoken on the phone, turned out to be a chatterbox when we went to pick her up. She gushed over how pretty I was, that her son had finally found someone acceptable, and that she couldn't wait to see the cute little starter home we'd bought. It was a long ride as she went on and on about the things my fiancé had done growing up, the things she hoped he'd be able to accomplish, the dreams she knew he had. It was a little awkward. I barely got a word in edgewise, and my fiancé looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him up, but stayed silent as he drove us. Dinner was nice. She was quiet half the time as we were eating, and we made polite conversation as an upscale restaurant. I still remember the surprise on her face when I asked the waiter for the bill, and a comment about how it was great I was treating him to dinner for a change. I didn't say anything. My fiancé looked ashamed of her for a second, but we quickly moved on, and I didn't want to ruffle any feathers on the first night I'm meeting my fiancé's mother in person. It was during this night as well that I noticed something I would never forget about his mother, and that was that she didn't seem to realize I was the main handler of our finances. We left the restaurant and the drive to our house was pleasant. We talked about the surrounding area and she commented on the upscale neighborhoods we started driving through. I'll admit, I took a small amount of satisfaction when she got quiet as he slowed down and pulled up the driveway to our house. Once we got inside and she realized the inside was as nice as the outside, she took a seat at the bar and the conversation started up again. Not really though, since it was mostly her talking and us nodding and listening as she droned on. She made comments about him buying the car, him paying for our vacations in the future, and she even insinuated that he financed our house. I let it slide. I was never one to flaunt my wealth, and she I think took that as a sign that she was right, but I didn't correct her. The night ended with her being slightly drunk, telling us stories of when fiancé was a baby, and eventually he coaxed her into the car to take her home. By the time he got back I was asleep, and while we didn't really talk much about the visit, he apologized for some of her comments and we agreed it would never be a regular thing to have her over. The next few years of her in our lives revolved around, apart from her constant backhanded compliments, her second-guessing every single thing he paid for. Ever. He knew I was private about my finances. He never told her anything apart from that we were handling things as a couple, and I didn't really care if she wanted to delude herself, so we let it go. We were going to get married in the summer, 3 years after we got together, And it was only months before I was to marry that I found out I was infertile. 100% I would never have children and actually had to have my ovaries removed due to them being deformed. He still wanted to be with me, despite also wanting children, so we stayed together. If you made it this far, congrats, because you now get to the good part. I was making breakfast. It was a weekend and he was in the backyard in the garden when his phone pinged a text. It was from his mom and she was asking, "When are you getting the prenup?" I was shocked to say the least, and when I questioned him, he was also visibly surprised that she'd brought one up. We'd not discussed one. I had no intention of ever leaving him as long as he remained the man I fell in love with, and he had no money that he knew of that needed protected. He called her, didn't tell her I was in the room, and it was like she was an entirely different woman. He wasn't on speakerphone, but I could still hear her loudness as she proclaimed I was out for his money. He was barely able to speak as she ranted that he bought me a house and cars and given me tons of money to live on, and she demanded he protect the family money in case we got divorced. He eventually got her off the phone, shouting over her that our finances were none of his business and he'd handle himself however he seen fit. It didn't stop though. Every day for the next week she hounded and harassed him about protecting his future in case I decided to take everything and leave him high and dry. It got even worse when his mother discovered I was barren. I don't even know how she found out, as myself and my husband were the only ones who knew, and he never told her. Just out of the blue, she started including in her vitriol rants that I was intentionally making myself infertile so I could keep all the money to myself and not have to share with future children. It hurt. He could see it hurt, and I've never seen him so furious with someone. That particular phone call ended with him screaming that he never wanted to hear from her again and her wailing that I was taking him and everything else away from her. To put it mildly, I was done with her antics and she was uninvited to the wedding. He explained it to the rest of his family, leaving out any mention of my wealth, and they all turned on her for the things she'd said. I'd met the rest of his family slowly over the years and they'd all liked me, his mother seeming to be the only one with a problem. When we got married, it was a little over a month after we originally wanted, but we just told everyone we dragged our feet a little on the booking of the venue. His mother did not attend, but the rest of his family did, and were all happy for us. We spent a few happy years together, barely hearing from his mother. As we approached 30 though, I found myself more and more okay with not having children, whereas my husband wanted a couple. We got counseling, we talked endlessly, and after a heartbreaking few months of towing the line, we amicably decided to divorce. He wanted kids and I didn't. There just wasn't a way to compromise on that. We announced it to his family together. Many tears were shed by all, but it was overall probably one of the most peaceful divorces you could ever see. It only took 2 days for his mother to show up on my doorstep with the sheriff, while hubby was at work. I was flabbergasted. When I opened the door, I was wide-eyed and had no idea what to do, but the sheriff stepped forward and handed me a piece of paper. I have to admit, when I read the bold print at the top while she smugly watched me, I ended up laughing out loud. Almost doubled over and laughing so loud the poor officer probably thought I was insane for a second. I looked at her, still laughing, as she looked angry and confused, and addressed her directly for the first time in almost half a year. "Mill, are you seriously trying to evict me from my own home?" That's right, she had handed me an eviction notice. I handed it back. The sheriff asked him to please stay where he is and shut the door before she could respond. I don't know what she said, but her wailing could be heard loudly and clearly as I walked through the house to my office. When I went back out, I handed the sheriff the deed to my home and he looked it over while she looked over his shoulder. The sheriff did not look amused as he glanced towards her multiple times. In my county, at the time, you had to have a law enforcement officer sign off that an eviction notice had been delivered in person before you could actually take a tenant to court to fully evict. So basically, whatever she thought she was doing, what she was actually doing was wasting this guy's time with whatever lies she told to get him here. He hands me back the deed, rips the eviction notice in half, and starts questioning why she thinks she can just evict the owner from their own home. "You need to get out. Get out of my son's house." She shouted that and other incoherent things at me instead, and I rolled my eyes, almost amused still, and stepped inside while the sheriff started giving her a talking down. I left the door slightly open, but she didn't try to come in, nor did the sheriff, as I went ahead and texted my husband to let him know what is happening while going back to my office. When I emerged once more, the sheriff had a look on his face of someone who was absolutely done, but I was as well, and I'd already decided to burn this last bridge. See, the real reason our wedding was delayed was because we'd moved the date to see a lawyer. "I'm not leaving my house, but I will give you one thing that'll make you happy," I told her as I opened the door, and she looked uncertain but didn't want to say too much with an officer of the law standing right next to us. "We got that prenup you wanted. Do you want to read it?" She practically tore the papers. She snatched them from my hands so fast, and she looked so pleased with herself up until it got to the point of splitting assets. To put it simply, Everything attained while already married was split 50-50. Everything from before marriage was to be treated as though we were never married. What the fuck game are you playing at? She demanded, clearly pissed, and I decided to hand her the single piece of paper in my other hand. She snatched it too, and as she pieced together in her mind what this all meant, she actually went pale. You. She didn't finish the statement. She was shaking. She was speechless. I think she was furious. The sheriff was looking like he wanted to take a nap. I took my papers back, asked the sheriff to escort her off my property, and closed the front door. Apparently, it became the hottest family gossip because not long after texting my husband the cat is out of the bag, he started getting calls from his family while he was still at work. Many begging him to reconsider leaving me, many telling him to do what he wants, and the majority condemning his mother after getting the full story. His family kept her at bay while we went through with divorce, as apparently she was beside herself and believed she was the downfall of our marriage. One of his aunts remarked that she was distraught that she'd made her son give up a fortune. It didn't matter that my money was an inheritance and untouchable to him even without the prenup. She was certain he could use it however he wished as long as we were married. I learned many years after we divorced, when his mother passed away, that she'd had mountains of debt. No one knows why she pushed so hard on that prenup. I stayed friends with my ex and am with someone else for the past few years. We even go out occasionally with ex, his wife and their kids. He's happy, I'm happy.